comic book movies can go down in history as being as some of the best, some of which to name: Batman 1989, Spider-Man 2, X-Men Days of Future Past, and Iron Man. And there are some that really missed the mark, such as the subject of today's review, Ang Lee's Hulk.
I remember being really psyched to know that one of my favourites as a child was getting the big screen treatment. I was a fan of the live-action Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno series and the respective animated series in 1982 and 1996. Although, it still confuses me to this day that when the Hulk changed back to Banner, his clothes grew back. After the success of 2000's X-Men and 2002 Spider-Man proved to be successful, all eyes turned to 2003 with Universal making the Hulk's cinematic debut.
So, for the 17th anniversary, let's get mad.
The biggest problem with this movie is pacing. I appreciate that you have to spend some time with a protagonist and getting to know them with their quirks and traits, but the movie doesn't really get to know Banner until we see him as an adult around the 29-minute mark, and it's 11 more minutes before we see the first transformation.
We have a faithful nod to the Hulk's origin, where Bruce takes the brunt of the Gamma Blast instead of Harper, the lab assistant. That bit I don't have a problem with. It's the fact that it took this long just to get here.
The first Hulk out does leave a lot in the shadows, literally and figuratively. Much of the first scenes with the creature does have him in poor lighting, and this is something that the 2008 reboot does as well. The better movie. And to be fair, I think this is smart, because the audience has to earn his full appearance, which happens with the second Hulk out in Banner's home at the expense of Talbot, but the character's a complete jerk, so I don't mind. The lighting is superior even when he gets out into the street using the streetlights to see him grow larger in size due to him getting angrier. Personally, I thought that was a stretch, probably more so than how his pants stayed on. But that's another story. I thought it was a clever idea that the Hulk was already within Bruce's genetic code due to his father, David Banner, which was a nice nod to the TV show, experimenting on himself in the 60s trying to strengthen the human immune system. And Bruce is doing something similar from a modern standpoint, but with these nanomed bots that go around and repair damaged cells in the human body. And what the Hulk needed for the door to open was being exposed to the gamma radiation.
David was a callback to Bruce's abusive father in the comics, as his father would often mock and belittle his intelligence as a child.
Another problem I have with this flick over time is that David Banner was not given the death penalty after committing domestic terrorism after setting a gamma bomb off at the military installation that he was based at. I'm pretty sure that most laws in the United States have the death penalty as punishment for committing said acts. This is something that the late Helsing 920 also pointed out in his reaction and review of this flick. The fact that it came down to father versus son for power, I suppose, was apropos in some sense. David had been searching for a way to eliminate defects in himself, and Bruce just wanted to help people and cure himself, which is pretty much par for the course for most incarnations of the Hulk. The man is always trying to cure himself because he just wants a normal life. And I suppose in a way he got that being an unassuming doctor in the Brazilian rainforest helping out the locals until a political enforcer had to make him utter these words. Which is a callback to Bixby's iconic line in the 1977 TV pilot.
All in all, this movie is a beautiful mess. There are some interesting ideas played with, but what it boils down to is a director with a misguided vision who had no business handling this project. And that's the really sad part. Ang Lee is a good filmmaker, but even critically acclaimed directors make duds on occasion. And Ang Lee's no exception.
In a word, Eric was miscast as the titular character. He had the look physically, but acting-wise, he was the wrong guy. To my understanding, they had David Duchovny in mind in some of the original choices, and that would have been an interesting scenario, as personally, I think David's a better actor than Eric. But that's my take. And I think Edward Norton may have been thought of as well around then, and that would have been a really ideal situation, because if you could take the writing and Edward from 2008 and put him in this movie with the great supporting cast and visual effects of this Hulk, then this would have been the perfect movie for the character.
I just found Eric depressing. Sure, you feel for a guy who doesn't know who he is or where he came from, because that can mess somebody up inside.
He did have good chemistry with Jennifer Connelly, who I really liked as Betty Ross. I don't agree that her performance was wooden despite what others have had to say. Jennifer, I found, was composed, emoted where she had to, and was just the perfect Betty Ross.
Betty acts as a go-between in trying to stop her father from keeping Bruce sedated and helping Bruce with his condition, which I think is the only way you can use to describe it.
The same can be said with Sam Elliott as General Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross. This was a performance that deserved praise and attention. This is a character that had a natural dislike for the Hulk in the wake of destruction that he would cause. Whereas here with Sam, he acts more like a leader that wants to maintain control rather than borderline obsession with ridding the world of an uncontrollable force of nature.
Nick Nolte, oh boy, where do I start? Would you like some ham with that salad, sir? I know over the years I've been known to use the phrase when actors enjoy what they do too much, and I feel like this is pretty much the case with Nolte, as I felt like he was competing with Sir Anthony Hopkins to see who could chew the scene more.
That's your answer. And indeed you shall die. And be reborn. A hero. Of the kind that walked the earth long before the pale religions of civilization infected humanity's soul.
Don't get it twisted, Nolte's a great actor. But I think this is one of those times where someone should have pulled him back a little. I'm all for enjoying what you do, but then it gets to levels like this where I feel like quoting Team 4 Star's Piccolo.
I feel like we should be stopping this.
And the same could be said when you have him absorbing energy, as he had mutated his cells with gamma radiation to become the Absorbing Man. I thought there was a unique spin on the character and not have it be Crusher Krill like it was in the comics and animated series. But movies like to offer their own takes on it. But Bruce is dead? Alright.
And then there's Josh Lucas's Glenn Talbot. Jeez Louise, I never wanted to see a smarmy jerk get ripped a new one so bad. Now granted, it's not as cathartic as what Hulk did to Loki in the Avengers, but when you consider that Talbot tried to move in on Betty and tried to carve up a piece of Bruce so that he could weaponize the creature, to see him go out in a blaze of glory was really satisfying, even if the comic book effect did look a little too gimmicky. And I like gimmicks, but Aang, tone it down. Seriously, too much is too much.
To see Lou Ferrigno cameo as a security guard was a nice touch, and that would be repeated 5 years later where he would actually receive lines and free pizza.
So, to sum it up, the supporting cast were great, but the leading protagonist should have been recast. This is where the movie really shines, albeit it's in one of the very few areas where it's able to, but when you get good graces, it's best not to question it.
Aang went a little too far with the comic book transition edits. It's fine when you have one or two, but he was finding a way to fit in dozens that didn't need to be there. And that was a little too distracting for most of the movie. The photorealism was more consistent with this creature as opposed to the 2008 movie that looks scarcely better than an Xbox 360 character, which I found to be quite jarring. My only major critique with this version is that the shade of green was never consistent with the Hulk. He would be a dark green and later a very fluorescent green that made you wonder if one of his powers was the ability to change shades due to anger or happiness. Also, the notion that he could grow bigger based on his anger increase was less than plausible. Make him stronger? I can buy that, as anger can be a motivator when you're pressed with a rock and hard place scenario. But to somehow grow from 7 to 9 feet and then escalate to 15 feet is something that I don't think even the Asylum Company would do. And they're used to churning out ridiculous nonsense. I mean, just look at Sharknado.
The idea that Bruce could sweat the change off when reverting back to his human form is something that I could agree with, because when you take into account that the human body is made up of over 90% water, to see him shrink down and shed that much water weight was scientifically plausible.
So effects are mixed in some areas, but they succeed more than the rest of the movie. Not that that says much. I think the only areas this score does well in are in the opening credits and when the Hulk is out in the desert, because then it resembles more of an action piece, which is how the story usually is in the comics and cartoons, and considering that you associate action with comic book movies, would stand to reason that it should have a driving music set. Unfortunately, this is not the case. There are a lot of slow scores in the beginning that really does little to help the movie. To be fair to Danny Elfman, he is a good composer. But when you listen to movies he's worked on, you tend to hear the same repetitive pieces in his work, whether it's the Tim Burton Batman movies, 2002 Spider-Man, or the 2018 Grinch animated movie.
And that's present with the opening score, the first transformation, and the final battle between the Hulk and Absorbing Man.
It's why I gave such a quick critique on it with the Hulk vs. Hulk review back in 2014, because you already knew what you were getting.
To put it simply, this movie was a flop. It only took in $234.5 million against a budget of $137 million. And considering that movies need to cross the $300 million mark in order to succeed, then this failed. Badly.
There are aspects that I enjoy from the supporting cast to the visual effects, but that does not save such a sizably budgeted project when you have the wrong performer for the lead role, a director who lacked the correct vision, and a score that you could tell was Danny Elfman's An Ocean Away even before seeing his name in the credits. Mr. Elfman, may I suggest range in future scores?
I think if this entire project had been taken back to formula with a more streamlined and simpler format, then it might have been a more enjoyable experience.
The movie series would be rebooted 5 years later with Edward Norton in the lead role, with a story that followed much closer to the TV series than the comics, with critics even citing that Norton was like Bixby reincarnated. It didn't fare that much better financially than this, but $16 million more is still more than what this took.
It's a guilty pleasure at the very least, and that's being generous. I'm MJ Knight, and Hulk ain't mad, he's just sad. And so are we. All in all, this movie is a beautiful mess. There are some interesting ideas that were played with, but what it boils down to... Could you imagine the Hulk doing that? Betty, Hulk, no line. Okay, honey, I'll get you your lines better if you promise not to wreck the set. Hulk, promise. You said that the last 3 times. Hulk sad. Hulk upset Betty. And then there's Josh Lucas's Glenn Talbot. Jeez Louise, I never wanted to see a smarmy jerk get ripped a new one so bad. Granted, it's not as cathartic as MJ Knight has lost his mind. I had a mind? I would have thought after all the years of, doing the TNA reviews on RDR, I wouldn't, my mind would have been like, wait, he's reviewing TNA. That's it, I'm out of here. I'm saying it because it's true. This is where the movie really shines, albeit it's in one of the very few... MJ Knight has encountered Windows blue screen. Oh no. Let's get Dr. Kaiju. We'll have to open him up. None of that. None of that. Dr. Kaiju Noir for Dr. Kaiju Noir for Frankenstein operations galore. Go to www.that'salotoffish.com. He's looking at me like, oh come on man, really? Love you too, buddy. Love you too. That's a good blooper. Why does Hulk have bloopers? Because it's funny. The bloopers might have been more cohesive than the plot. Ooh, I'm sorry. Did I say that out loud? Hulk not happy. You're never happy. It's why you're always angry. Touché. The idea that Bruce would sweat the change off when reverting back to his human form is something I could agree with, because when you take into consideration that the human body is made of... It's gonna be one of those. Where will the bloopers end? Where will the bloopers end? Where will the bloopers end? Why'd I do that? I don't know.